Hi, my name is Rachael Williams, and I've been invited by Joe to spend a few moments with you this morning as part of your conference. Ocular has been a community that I've been involved in for the last couple of years. I do notice, however, that when somebody invites me to speak publicly or to share my thoughts with others, that I have the most tremendous anxiety that accompanies any of these performances. And actually, performance anxiety has been something that I've experienced all of my life. So although I'm sitting here in front of you, trying to show some courage, inside I'm a complete mess. And actually, I can feel my heart rate. In fact, if I look on my Fitbit, and I'm a runner, I can see that my current heart rate is 132, which is actually higher than I achieved on my run this morning. And I also have a very familiar cluster of thoughts in my mind that are very familiar to me. And those are always that people are looking at me and just thinking, what do you know? And I also have a very familiar thought that people are just about to switch off. That kind of contributes towards my overwhelming sense of panic. But kind of what I've learned in my life, and particularly over the last 20 years in my role as a therapist, sitting one-on-one with individuals who are experiencing tremendous suffering, is that if I waited until I felt ready before I spoke to groups of individuals, I would never, ever do it. As far as I'm concerned, there is never, for me, any such thing as being ready. At the end of the day, this is literally the meaning of that expression, courage is fear walking. As far as I'm concerned, there is kind of no learning in my comfort zones. I only learn when I step outside them. And I have to be willing for this to be a successful talk and a complete and utter flop. I don't know which way it's going to go, but I have to be willing to have both of those in my history. And that's when I kind of find with courage that it's a really good moment for me to think about where the word comes from and its actual grammatical source, the Latin cur, with heart. So I'm sitting here able to do this with all of my thoughts, all of my fear. I'm doing it because I'm connecting with the Ocular community, which is something that's really meaningful for me. If I couldn't connect with that value, then I wouldn't be able to bring my worries on a walk with you guys this morning. So as normal, one of the thoughts that I have is, what on earth have I got to share with this community that could be meaningful? So what I thought I'd do today is I would share some of my favorite metaphors around fear, anxiety, thoughts and emotions and values. And maybe, just maybe, somebody out there will be able to make a connection with one of them so that we will be able to connect on that level of vulnerability, which fundamentally, I guess, is how we make friends. Nobody wants someone who makes it look easy. I don't look for the perfect person in my life. I look for somebody who is profoundly flawed and as imperfect as I am. So I am bringing that with me, and it's all here for the ride. So we'll see where it takes us. I guess for me, spending an awful lot of time with adolescents, I'm very concerned with how much we encourage individuals to strive and move towards this thing called happiness. And to me, vulnerability is really about looking at both sides of life's coin. I have to be willing to experience happiness. The flip side of that is sadness. As someone once said, if you throw away, the sadness, then you also throw away the ability to experience joy too. So life for me has some fleeting moments of joy, And it also I also experience and embrace the other 40 human emotions too, which means that I can lead not necessarily a happy all the time life, but a life that has some meaning and some purpose in it. And I'm very aware at the moment, especially in the difficult times that we're living in, that sense of meaning and purpose has, we've got a little bit lost with that. So I guess I'll start with the quote by Steve Hayes, which is something that I often remind myself of, which is, there is as much life in a moment of sadness as in a moment of happiness. So it's about finding some meaning in all of the emotions that life chucks at us. Because at the end of the day, if I move towards something like Ocular that really means something to me, then I experience a moment of joy. If I didn't do this talk this morning and had said to Joe, I want to do the talk, but I'm too nervous. I want to do the talk, but I'm too tired. I want to do the talk, but I don't feel ready. If I'd have actually allowed those to be thoughts that I got hooked on, I wouldn't be doing this. And therefore I wouldn't experience the sense of connection that bizarrely, even on Zoom, I'm actually feeling with this community now. And I guess a lot of the work that I do is very based on values, because I kind of have worked out that if I know who the people and the things that really matter to me, if I know what they are, then I can make sense of some of the more difficult feelings that I experience along the way. So if you ask yourself one question today, well, maybe two. The first one is, maybe rather than ask yourself or a loved one, you know, what's the matter? See if you can ask them what matters. And if any of you have got children or grandchildren, you will be really surprised by the response. And secondly, a challenge I lay down for you is that if I was to watch a video of your life over the last week, would I be able to guess from that what truly matters to you in your life? And if I kind of look at a video of my life over the last week, I'm not sure you would be able to guess. And that to me is a real moment of learning and something that I need to pay attention to. So it always amazes me working with adolescents in particular, that kind of adolescents now are physically safer than they ever have been, but they're 3 times more likely to die. And that statistic always really surprises me. And it kind of reminds me that actually, although we may be in a more physically safe environment, actually we're often feeling quite emotionally lost and unstable. And bizarrely, we can actually manage a tremendous amount of difficulty in our external worlds. The biggest barrier to us actually moving towards our values and the things that we really want to do, they're very often the internal events, the things that we don't get to see in others. But our own thoughts and our own emotions tend to be the biggest barrier to us actually reaching out to the individuals that truly float our boat. So a lot of my work and the metaphors I'm going to share with you now are very simple, but they kind of remind me that as human beings, we put so much energy into trying to control things that we fundamentally have absolutely diddly squat control over. We cannot control our thoughts unless I take hallucinogenic drugs, and I'm not suggesting that to anybody. I can't control my thoughts, but I also can't control my emotions. But I can learn how to relate to those a little bit more skillfully so that they become potholes and speed bumps, not barriers to me actually moving forward and leading a valued life. And fear in particular, because it is so viscerally triggered and so viscerally experienced, it kind of, you know, if you think about emotions as being energy and motion in our body, the biggest arousal comes from, won't surprise you, anger, but also from fear too, and from anxiety. So in some respects, with this energy in motion, the only difference between an emotion and a feeling is awareness. And often we're not really that aware as to what we're feeling. We're not that curious as human beings about taking a look inside, understanding that this stuff is not random. This stuff is showing up because maybe something isn't quite right in the way that you're living your life, or that something really, really matters. So that when you turn your back on it, my goodness me, it's really painful. You know, emotions are physical, and the way that we relate to them can have a really big impact on the way that we relate to actual pain, physical pain. And interestingly, surveys of young people say that they would rather experience physical pain than they would emotional pain. That's something that we really need to keep an eye on, which is why we have so many creative ways, I guess, of self-harming, whether it's having too much wine, too little, overeating, undereating, over-exercising, under-exercising, or putting horrible stuff on somebody's Instagram account. But actually emotions, if we can tap into them as guides, then do you know what? They don't hang around for quite as long. They're actually only meant to be in our system, by the way, for about 2 minutes, 42 seconds. Is there anybody out there that's experienced an emotion longer than that? Well, I can start the process, the ball running, with saying that I felt anxious for 24 hours since Joe emailed me and said what I talked to you this morning. So what is it that I'm doing that has kept that level of anxiety as high as it is? Sometimes it's a really useful question to ask, especially if you have children or grandchildren, if they seem to have almost become their emotion, God forbid. You know how we talk about some people and we say they're an angry woman, you know, they're a depressed child, and we kind of mistake the person for the emotion that they're feeling. Thank God I'm not my thoughts, and thank goodness I'm not my emotions. And actually, a useful thing that that I always find is that if we can kind of name an emotion, then we tame the impact on our body. So we name it to tame it. And if you've got any children or grandchildren, I love the idea of labeling it to cradle it. So name it to tame it, label it to cradle it. Too often when we ask someone how they are, and I know this from working with Ocular clients too, often what you get back is, I'm fine. See if you can bring a little bit more curiosity to that. See if you can understand that if you've got tummy ache, you've got a pain in your tummy, which we tend to just diminish and call butterflies. See if you can understand why that's happening. What's the fear there? Because the fear response, fight or flight, is naturally going to move all of the oxygenated blood away from your tummy to your muscles so that you can run away from the saber-toothed tiger. But for most of you, there isn't a saber-toothed tiger in your living room. Most of the stuff that we're really scared of is actually inside ourselves. And that can make it really hard to put some wiggle room in there. So by trying to label something, trying to name it, it can kind of reduce the physical arousal that accompanies that emotion. Thoughts are not facts, thank goodness. And actually, it's not the thoughts that are the problem. We have 50,000 of them a day. It's not the content of the thoughts necessarily that's the problem. It's the fact that we as human beings trust our thoughts so much. Most of them are actually not on this present moment. Most of them are on what happened yesterday. The vast majority, it feels to me, are often on what's coming tomorrow. So few of our thoughts, psychiatrists and psychologists estimate as low as 10% are actually what's happening in this present moment, which is tricky, isn't it? Because the only thing that any of you guys have got any control over is actually this moment, not what happened yesterday, not what happened tomorrow. So if we can't get rid of our thoughts, if they're there, then what do we do about that? Especially if we start to label them as negative thinking or positive or true or false. And actually, I've learned that this labeling process with thoughts is really unhelpful. Because if I label something as negative, then I'm going to do my damnedest to try and get rid of it. Okay. And if I'm putting my energy into trying getting rid of my thoughts, then I'm not putting my energy into the people and things that actually mean something to me. So we can learn some skills to kind of try and reduce the volume of our thoughts, or more importantly, to try and increase the volume of the stuff around them, so that we're not so acutely aware of the running commentary that we have going on in our lives. And if you kind of think of your brain a little bit like a radio station, I'm useless at public speaking FM, which I've been tuned into for the last 24 hours. But you know what? If I'm listening to Radio 5, then Capital Radio is available to me at the same time. I have so many different bandwidths inside my brain, but sometimes I tune into one of them that is longer than is good for me. And I think sometimes it's just being aware that that's where I'm tuned into, and see if I can shift the focus of my awareness elsewhere so I can kind of change the story inside my head. One of my favorite metaphors for that is around passengers on a bus, that we're all driving our life buses. Yeah. And we're I don't know what's on the front of your bus today. On the front of my bus is to try and be a little kinder to myself. So self-kindness is on my bus today. I hope I'm productive today as well. So that's on the front of my bus. And I'm kind of driving my bus, moving in the direction I want to go to. Life's a little bit like this. We get so many passengers who come along for the ride. So many passengers who come on for the ride. Some of them are really helpful. They sit at the back and they zip it. Yeah. But others move up to the front of the bus, start yelling, and they may even tap you on the shoulder, and they may start being either sarcastic or trying to get you to derail. Okay. It's really hard, isn't it, to bring your attention to actually driving the bus when so many passengers get on and it feels as though they can sabotage where you're going. And so much with our thoughts and with our passengers, we put so much energy either into agreeing with our passengers. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I am lost. I don't know where I'm going. I can't drive very well. Yeah. Or we end up arguing with them. Don't say that to me. No, you're absolutely wrong. But every time we agree or we argue, we're not looking out of the front of our bus. We're actually engaged in a process that is completely pointless. It's pointless. So how can we hold these thoughts more lightly? And part of the trick is to acknowledge your passengers, right? But keep your hands on your wheel and your eyes looking out of your bus. And that's where we can learn some skills to kind of drop anchor, so that we can turn the volume of our passengers down. Because guess what? I promise you, they ain't going anywhere. I've had passengers on my bus since I was about 5. Now they're still on my bus. This isn't about me putting energy into trying to get rid of them. They ain't going anywhere, right? But I've got to learn how I can relate to them in a more savvy way, so that they don't either make me go in the wrong direction, or worse still, derail me completely. Okay, so fighting or agreeing with your thoughts, it's a waste of time, guys. Instead, if you can ask yourself, instead of whether the thought is true or false, if you can ask yourself, is this thought helpful? And if it isn't helpful, thank your mind for coming up with it. See if you can bring a little bit of playfulness to it, right? Because you have 50,000 of them a day. Most of them really aren't helpful. So see if you can, and I often do this with adolescents and with adults, see if you can kind of say, thank your mind for coming up with this stuff. It's just doing the best it can to try and keep you safe. And it's hard to live with this brain that can sometimes be helpful, but sometimes it feels can try and sabotage us in what we're doing. But see today, a little challenge for you today, see if there are any stories inside of your mind that you get really hooked on. Notice what happens to your behavior when you get hooked on those stories. And remember that a thought is just two synapses pinging together and coming up with something, right? Can you experience your thoughts in the good old metaphor rich? Can you experience them as leaves on a stream or as clouds in the sky? I promise you that if you wait a moment, they will pass. And I'm also reminded very much with emotions too, which is to me something that I often forget, that posture and emotions are really intricately linked. So whilst posture is impacted by emotions, if I'm feeling sad or worried, then my posture will become more inward and I'll restrict the oxygen going to my brain, so I'm likely to bring on a panic attack. But actually in the same way, guess what? We can actually control our emotions through adjusting our posture. So, and we know that from levels of testosterone in people in large studies who practice power poses, and to see how much more powerful and in control they felt. And it sounds really, oh, what's that all about? But actually the research on this is overwhelming, that if we can roll our shoulders back, if we can sit more upright, if we can put both feet on the ground, quite naturally we feel a little bit more courageous and we feel a little bit as though we've got this. So don't forget that link between mind and body. And it kind of brings me onto mindfulness. And I was saying last Friday when I was talking to some people from UK Ocular, it's such a misused and misinterpreted word. I'm so bored of the word mindfulness that just literally saying it makes me slightly yawn. And that's partly because mindfulness means nothing to most people. And it's actually quite hard work to find some meaning in it for yourself. But in a nutshell, what I thought I'd share with you, all that mindfulness is mind and body in the same place at the same time. So your body may be sitting in your living room or at your desk now. My mind tells me there's only two people watching this, so I'm gonna just aim at those two people. So you're either sitting at your desk, I don't care where you are, but very often your body might be somewhere, but your mind will be somewhere else. And from my experience, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Okay, so much around how we relate to pain, so much about our well-being, so much about our relationship with emotions is around actually, can we practice being more present? And it's interesting because the present moment can be terrifying too, can't it? You know, this isn't about saying if you're present, if you're in the moment, you're going to experience elevated levels of happiness. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if you're in the present moment, you have more choices about what you do with your hands and feet and in which direction you move, because you can't control the past and you can't control the future. And in some respects, that is where Kung Fu Panda really does nail it with his wonderful quote that I can never, ever remember, but I'm going to give it a go now. The past is history. The future is a mystery. All we have now is this moment, which is a gift, which is why it's called the present. Okay, and the quickest way, and if any of you want any resources on this, just let me know. The quickest way to actually shine the spotlight of our awareness on this present moment is to learn how to tap into the resources that each and every one of you naturally have. We often reach out so much for help externally, and quite rightly, but sometimes we forget that we do have some resources such as our breath and such as our senses that can actually really help us to ground us and to anchor us even when life gets really, really choppy and we feel really, really out of control. And if we can learn how to tap into our breath, really learn how to use that as a resource, then actually we can relate to our anxieties and our fears in a profoundly different way. Kind of turns that arousal down, turns the volume down of that running commentary inside our minds. I'm reading a brilliant book on the moment on the breath, and there's a quote in there that has been one of the most meaningful quotes I've ever read in my life. He's talking about how the way that we breathe has a profound impact on our mental health. And he was talking about the nose. The nose is this vessel of breath, as being almost like a silent warrior. He says the nose is like a gatekeeper for the body, a pharmacist for the brain, and a weather vane for emotions. And that really resonates with me, because I know the power of using your breath and managing your breath in a way that activates your vagus nerve, which is the bit that we all need to practice tapping into a little bit more, so that we can experience a little bit more rest and gist in our busy lives. And the vagus nerve, if any of you are interested, I'll ping you an article on it, is the one that runs from behind both of our ears. It's the longest nerve in the body, and it weaves and touches all of the major organs. And it's the nerve that's responsible for adjusting our breath based on our heart rate. And we all know what it's like to be panicky, shallow breath and anxious. And actually, if we can learn how to breathe deeper and slower, and more importantly, to have a longer exhale than an inhale, if we can learn a few tricks of the trade, such as humming to increase your vagal tone, cold water exposure, even if it's just splashing the face, all of those have a profound impact on our ability to experience calm inside our minds. And sort of just near the end, I want to just remind everybody that the glaringly obvious that I have to remind myself every day, that mental health requires exactly the same time, discipline, routine, and energy as physical health. It's no different. Most of us take it for granted until something goes horribly wrong, and then we have no choice to address it, but to address it. And actually the time to do a lot of this work, and we know that a lot of work around our mental health, we're talking about 5 minutes a day here. It's not even like my yoga session, you know, which should be 40 minutes, but I stop after 12 minutes and think, what's the point of this? But it doesn't take a lot of time to actually learn how to lift difficult emotional weights. Okay, we don't, it's amazing when we do gym work and go to the gym or work out, how we push ourselves to the point of discomfort, and then we say when we push past it, haven't I done well? This morning I ran fast. But we don't see that stuff with emotions, do we? We just try and avoid it like the plague. And very often we avoid it because we genuinely believe that we're not going to survive it. We genuinely believe that we're not going to survive it. But in actual fact, if we can practice how to relate to this stuff a little differently, it can have a profound impact on our sense of well-being and purpose. And in a funny way, it's kind of, I don't know whether you've ever felt that there is someone else running your show. I don't know whether you've ever felt that you have a self-critic that's running your show. So just see if you can notice today if you're running your show or if the commentary in your mind is. Because remember, that self-critic is just trying to keep you safe. That's all it's trying to do. And lastly, I want to remind you that one of the components of self-compassion is common humanity. Okay, we are all in this together. Everybody on this group and in this group is a little bit broken. I know I am. And it reminds me of the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is the art of precious scars. Just to remind you that, you know, just because we're a little bit broken doesn't mean we're any less valuable for that. And I have to finish with a Brené Brown quote, because if I'm talking about vulnerability, it would be unfair not to. Just remember, be you, be seen, and belong. Lots of love.